The world had been waiting for this moment, but nothing could have prepared them for the way it unfolded. In the heart of London, beneath a sky heavy with anticipation, the royal palace stood like a silent witness to history being rewritten. For weeks, rumors had circulated through every corner of the media, whispers of change within the monarchy, subtle shifts in power, and a mysterious new direction being quietly shaped behind closed doors. Yet no one expected it to happen like this. No one expected her. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, or as the court was now cautiously beginning to refer to her in private briefings, the future queen in all but name. The ceremony was not officially announced as a coronation preview, nor was it labeled as a transition of authority. Instead, it was described as a state appearance of national unity. But insiders knew better. This was no ordinary engagement. This was a moment of positioning, of symbolism, of silent declarations that would echo across generations. And at the center of it all stood Catherine. When the royal convoy arrived at Westminster, the crowd erupted in a wave of stunned applause. Cameras flashed violently, struggling to capture what many described later as an almost unreal presence. Catherine stepped out first, not behind. Not beside, but leading the arrival sequence with a calm authority that immediately shifted the atmosphere. She wore a structured ivory ensemble, elegant yet commanding, with subtle detailing that seemed almost intentional in its symbolism, simplicity fused with strength. There were no excessive jewels, no overwhelming display of wealth. Instead, everything about her appearance projected control, confidence, and a quiet certainty that something significant had changed, and then it happened. She paused at the top of the steps, not rushed, not guided, not hesitant. She turned slightly, acknowledging the gathered crowd with a soft but unmistakably regal expression. And in that brief moment, something shifted, not just in the optics of the event, but in the perception of power itself. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was immediate. Queen Camilla, watching the broadcast from a private chamber alongside senior aides, reportedly fell silent. According to palace chatter, carefully contained but impossible to fully suppress, the atmosphere in the room tightened the moment Catherine appeared. It wasn't anger that filled the space, it was something more unsettling. Recognition. The recognition that public sentiment was moving in a direction that could no longer be ignored. For years, Camilla had navigated her role with careful balance, stabilizing her position within the monarchy after decades of scrutiny. But what unfolded on that day was something different. It wasn't a challenge through words or policy. It was a challenge through presence. Catherine didn't need to speak to command attention. She simply was. As the ceremony began, dignitaries filled the grand hall, their eyes repeatedly drifting toward her. Even senior officials, those trained to remain composed under any circumstance, could not fully conceal their reactions. There was a shift in energy, subtle, yet undeniable. And then came the moment that would later dominate headlines across the globe. Catherine was invited to step forward to receive the ceremonial acknowledgement traditionally reserved for the most senior female royal present. The invitation itself was routine. The response was anything but. As she approached, the hall fell into a silence so deep it felt almost unnatural. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters held their breath. Even the orchestral background seemed to soften, as if the entire room understood that history was bending itself into a new shape. She stopped at the designated point. For a brief second, everything hung in balance. Then she inclined her head, not in submission, but in composed acknowledgement. A gesture that carried both respect and unmistakable authority. And in that single motion, observers later described the moment as the quiet coronation of influence. Across social media, the reaction was instantaneous. Clips of the moment spread within minutes, accompanied by captions like, "She looks like a queen already," and "The shift is undeniable." Analysts scrambled to interpret what they were seeing. Some called it optics, others called it evolution. But many agreed on one thing. The monarchy had entered a new psychological chapter. Back inside the palace, tensions were reportedly rising behind closed doors. Camilla's advisors, according to speculative accounts circulating among royal commentators, were unsettled by the overwhelming public response. It wasn't simply admiration for Catherine. It was the speed and intensity of it. The narrative seemed to form on its own, without orchestration, without resistance. And that was what made it dangerous. Because in monarchy, perception is power. And perception that day belonged to Catherine. Meanwhile, Prince William remained composed throughout the event, though those observing closely noted his subtle attentiveness to Catherine's every movement. There was a shared understanding between them, one built over years of experience, pressure, and public scrutiny. He was not reacting to the shift. He was aware of it and perhaps quietly prepared for it. As the ceremony progressed, speeches were delivered, formalities observed, and traditions upheld. Yet none of it could fully reclaim the attention that Catherine's arrival had already seized. Every camera angle seemed to drift back toward her. Every pause in conversation seemed to orbit her presence. Even senior diplomats, accustomed to controlling narrative flow, appeared momentarily disarmed. It was not rebellion, it was redefinition. By the time the first segment of the ceremony concluded, commentators around the world were already framing the event in historic terms. Words like turning point, transition, and new royal architecture dominated broadcasts, but within the palace corridors, the mood was far more complicated because everyone understood what had just occurred. No decree had been issued, no title had officially changed. Something far more powerful had shifted. Authority had begun to relocate, and Catherine, standing calmly amid the grandeur of centuries-old tradition, had become its focal point, not through force, not through declaration, but through presence alone. And as the cameras continued to roll, capturing every angle, every expression, every subtle movement, the world unknowingly witnessed the beginning of a transformation that would ripple far beyond that single day. A transformation that would not be easily reversed. And somewhere behind the polished walls of power, Queen Camilla's carefully constructed stability began to show its first imperceptible cracks. The second half of the ceremony unfolded with an almost uneasy calm. What should have been a controlled continuation of tradition now felt different, like a stage performance where the script remained unchanged, but the audience had already decided on a new lead character. Catherine remained composed, seated among senior royals, her posture steady, her expression calm, yet unmistakably present. Every so often, a camera would drift toward her, and each time it did, the reaction from viewers around the world intensified. It was no longer about what she was doing, it was about what she represented. Inside the palace, quiet conversations were reportedly taking place away from public view. Advisors and senior aides moved through corridors with restrained urgency. Nothing official was spoken aloud, but the tension was unmistakable. The balance of perception had tilted too quickly, too visibly, and Queen Camilla, though maintaining outward composure during the event, was said to be deeply aware of the shifting narrative surrounding her position. Issue was not confrontation. It was contrast. The contrast between established authority and emerging popularity had become impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Catherine was invited to join a small procession through the Grand Gallery. As she walked, something subtle yet powerful happened. The crowd lining the hall instinctively reacted to her presence first. Applause broke out in scattered waves before protocol dictated it, as if public instinct had overridden formal structure. Prince William walked slightly behind her at moments, not as a sign of distance, but as a silent acknowledgement of role and timing. Together, they moved through the historic space like figures stepping into a new chapter already being written around them. By the time the event concluded, commentators were no longer speculating. They were interpreting. Some called it a soft transition of influence, others a symbolic coronation moment without a crown. But one phrase kept repeating across headlines and broadcasts: the future has arrived early. And in the quiet depth of the palace afterward, as doors closed and the public spectacle faded, one reality lingered behind every conversation, every glance, every carefully measured silence. Nothing had been officially changed, yet everything had already changed. Catherine's first appearance as queen in effect had not only stunned the world, it had rewritten the atmosphere of the crown itself.